And of course, the cameras are pointing out towards the west, so the last shreds of daylight will be seen from the perspective that we're looking at the chimney. Whereas if you, for those in the square, if they turn around and look out to the east, they'll see that the light is dying out. We can see out the window here, sky's growing pretty dark in the other direction, and we might have a situation where it does become difficult to see the smoke or tell what color it is.
In which case we would be waiting for the bells again, as we were mentioning earlier, if it's a successful vote. Otherwise, people will be craning their necks to see what they can see from the square. But
meanwhile, it might be a good opportunity to talk about one of the unique features of this conclave. For, as we've mentioned earlier, there are 133 cardinals who entered into the conclave. That's the largest number of cardinals ever. And there was actually a little bit of a discrepancy in the law and the procedures governing the conclave, because Paul VI in 1975 had introduced a rule that the maximum number of cardinal electors would not be more than 120. Don, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the history of the numbers of electors. Maybe even going back a little further, the question of who would be made an elector was a very contentious issue, and when popes would make new cardinals to influence perhaps the conclaves, this was a big point of contention with the college at times.
Yes, absolutely. So the origins of as you know, there are three levels of cardinals. There's cardinal bishops, there's cardinal priests, and cardinal deacons. And originally, there are 6 cardinal bishops of the Suburbicarian sees. He's like Frascati and Ostia. Ostia is the senior bishop on the see. There were 35 cardinal priests. The cardinal priests were drawn from the original tituli, the early parishes of the city of Rome. And so we can see before even the year 500 the lists of the original parishes, and they would be given the title to these parishes. And there were 14 cardinal deacons. The city was divided into 14 different districts based on the needs of the faithful. And so as time went on, this number was fixed at 70. But during the early modern period, the church had grown so much and worldwide that 70 wasn't enough to give a decent representation for the church anymore. And so during the after Vatican II, the number was increased to 120, and this allowed for a much wider representation of cardinals from throughout the world. And the discrepancy came because popes wanted to make more appointments, because you have cardinals aging out all the time. They're always, every month or two you have another cardinal that doesn't get to vote anymore. And it's not just Francis that exceeded the number. Benedict and John Paul also exceeded the number. They just did not have a conclave during the period when the number was exceeded. And so clearly it's the manifest will of the supreme legislator, from the 3 last popes, that if there were to be a conclave, it would be it would be that all the eligible electors. So the cardinals a couple days ago made a decision saying that this was the manifest will of the elector. All cardinals under 80 who are in Rome and can participate can vote.
Joining us now in studio, we have Joseph Tulloch, our very own Joseph Tulloch from the English section. We were mentioning the Mass this morning. Joseph was actually one of the readers at that Mass, as he read the other day at the after the funeral Mass in suffrage for Pope Francis. Joe, you were standing out there in that square filled with tens of thousands of people. First of all, would you like to tell us what that felt like and how you lived this experience?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe. I'm part of the English team here at Vatican News. And what Linda's talking about there is... So I was reading this morning, but before that I had the chance to read at the second, what they call Novem Diales Mass, so the second Mass, basically in memory of Pope Francis. It was really nice. It was a really... great opportunity to say goodbye to the Pope. That was right after the death, and we were still really, really missing him. So that was a really great opportunity. It was about 200,000 people showed up for that Mass. I think some of them had been planning to come. There was supposed to be the canonization of Carlo Acutis on that day, and so there was lots of young people who were already going to be in Rome. But what was nice was they were clearly happy to be there for the mass that they had to go to instead, which was the second memorial mass for the Pope. There's lots of cheering. They really, there was really. Sorry, I thought I saw a flash of smoke there, but it was just a seagull's wing, I think.
Right.
Very disappointing. Yeah, so that was a really great opportunity. And then this morning too, that was the Missa pro eligendo, so the mass for the election of the Pope, and it's basically this opportunity for the cardinals to come together, and together with the people of God, lots of ordinary Catholics and perhaps some non-Catholics gathered in the Basilica with them to pray and to invoke the Holy Spirit on this conclave process. So really nice. I did, to be honest, when I've been here now at Vatican News for about 2.5 years, and I always imagined that the conclave would be this period where I'd be doing so much journalism and going around and reporting on everything. And in the end, I've just read a lot of masses. But, that's nice as well. And I've, really...
You've been working hard as well, writing
yes, that's true as well.
stories. And what reading did you do this morning?
So it was a reading, putting me on the spot. It was from, I think, the prophet Isaiah. And really nice reading about, I think it's the one that has... The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has appointed me to preach the good word to the poor, something like that. So the kind of a reading coming out of this prophetic tradition in the Old Testament. And of course the readings are picked, I assume, with kind of the idea of reminding the cardinals of what they're looking for in a pope. So somebody who will have who will have the poor in mind. I think I'm getting the reading right. It's funny actually, when you're there reading, you're so focused on saying the words right that you're not even thinking about what it means. So I may have misremembered what the reading was.
No, I think you're remembering rightly.
Yeah.
That it was focused on the characteristics that a new pope should hopefully have. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Joe is going to be in studio with us again in these coming days as we await the smoke, unless at this point it could be white.
Who knows? Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to be joining on Friday morning. If, of course, we could very well have a new pope by then, because by then there will have been there'll be 9 ballots between now and Friday morning. So there's 1 ballot this evening, and then there'll be 4 tomorrow. And so it's quite possible to have a new pope by Friday morning, but if not, you'll be able to listen to me and my wonderful colleague Francesca Merlo, who's producing today, but she'll be joining me in the studio on Friday morning. If we don't have a pope by then, who knows?
Yes, thank you here to Francesca Merlo and to Mario Scatton, who are both working on the other side of the window here in this Vatican Radio studio.
We've been talking a bit about all that's happened between the funeral and the general congregations leading up to this conclave. Perhaps we could just take a brief look at actually what happens. We've talked about the Pope coming out onto the balcony, the first acclamation by the people of Rome and so on. But then we have to look forward also to the installation, the inauguration of the new papal ministry. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about what happens then, remembering past occasions. It's usually about a week, isn't it, between the announcement, between the successful outcome of the conclave.
Well, first of all, all the delegations that are going to be here in Rome for that ceremony have to get here. So it can't be immediately afterwards. There are some technical times that have to be respected. So even should the Pope be elected on Friday, it couldn't be on Sunday. It would just be too early. Although on Sunday he could probably do his first Angelus address.
Yes, absolutely. And we have to remember that if he's a bishop already, and all the cardinals in there, and most of the cardinals are bishops, that he becomes Pope the moment he accepts. When the cardinal asks him, do you accept the canonical election as Roman pontiff? And he says, yes, he's the Pope. And so the installation mass is, it's not a formality, it's a very important moment that he inaugurates his Petrine ministry. But he becomes Pope with full authority at that moment. And then the inauguration, I remember being at the inauguration in 2013 and being up on the colonnade. That was a great privilege. I love doing that. And you see, because then you allow people just for the funeral too, like when they have the delay, you want the dignitaries to be able to come, and they will come. I mean, as we've seen it, I mean, the world pays attention to what happens in the city, and that's critical. But there's a whole set of ceremonies that go along with the new pope, right? That end and culminate really after the installation mass with the actual possessio, the taking possession of his cathedral at St. John Lateran, which I was also present for when Pope Francis took charge of his cathedral. And so this is a wonderful series of events that makes fuller the meaning of what's happening in the Sistine Chapel right now.
Pope Francis particularly wanted his inauguration, if I remember correctly, to be on the feast day of St. Joseph. Isn't that right? And that, of course, became, again, a bit of a theme during the pontificate. We learnt that he had the statue of the sleeping Joseph that he would keep on his bedside table there in Santa Marta. Had a particular significance for him, didn't it?
And he inserted the name of Joseph in every mass that was said throughout the world. So this a great devotion to Saint Joseph, to Saint Joseph and his feast days as patron of the universal church, but also as a patron of workers and as a patron of Christian fathers. It was very important to him, for sure.
The thing I remember particularly about the installation of Francis, of course, was that it was only 3 days apart from the Archbishop of Canterbury. And because I was covering ecumenical affairs, I wanted to be in both places. And fortunately, because there was that little time gap, it could have been on the same day. But actually, in the end, I was able to be here in Rome for the papal inaugural mass, the papal installation, and then get to Canterbury as well for the Archbishop of Canterbury's taking the beginning of his ministry there in Canterbury Cathedral. And there was a nice, when Francis died, there was a nice little tribute from Justin Welby, no longer, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury, but there was a nice tribute in which he talks about his first meeting with Pope Francis, and he was ushered into these, extraordinarily elaborate and baroque surroundings in the apostolic palace, and feeling a little bit intimidated anyway. And he sits down, and the Pope begins by saying, I'm senior to you, as you know. And of course his kind of heart sunk, and he thought, well, this kind of wasn't the tone I was expecting. And then the Pope looks up and jokes and goes, by 3 days only. And that was kind of the tone that the jokes continued, and it was the beginning of a very strong relationship in which they kind of lived out this ministry of walking and working together, which became the leitmotif of the sort of Anglican Catholic dialogue through this past 12 years.
Well, in a much more modest register, we also learnt to know him and to walk with him after that 13th of March, which we don't forget because we were here. We didn't know who Bergoglio was, and very slowly we began to understand him. He went to Lampedusa, as you mentioned, his very first journey abroad, after having said that he didn't really want to travel. It wasn't his thing, but he went to Lampedusa because that issue was so important for him. And being there, he realized, he told us afterwards, he realized how important it was for the people to feel his closeness and to feel he was going to them. And he ended up undertaking 48 apostolic journeys abroad, as well as many others within Italy. Joe was on his last apostolic journey abroad to Belgium.
Yeah,
penultimate, because the last one was to Corsica.
Exactly.
But you went to Belgium.
That's right. Yeah. So there was a very quick one to Corsica where he came back, and I think within the day, exactly. But before that, the longest kind of traditional papal journey. The last traditional papal journey was the one he did to Luxembourg and Belgium. I was with the Pope for the stop he did in Belgium. And it was an interesting papal journey because it came right after this huge one that lasted several weeks across a couple of countries in Asia.
So 4 countries.
4 countries in Asia.
Asia and Oceania.
Yeah, and there'd been some, for instance, he'd been in East Timor, where something crazy like 70% or 60% of the population turned up for a mass he celebrated, and these incredible scenes. And I think it's the most Catholic country in the world, with the possible exception of Vatican City.
No, I think it's more Catholic than Vatican City. Okay. That's what the Vatican officials quit. But
okay, right. And so he'd just come back from that, and then he came to Belgium, which is obviously a fairly secular country. It's a country that's been really marked by the sexual abuse crisis, which is something that's happened in the church all over the world, but it was particularly bad in Belgium. And so it's a country where there's also, on a level, there's some also distrust, I think you can say, towards the church. And so it was a very interesting papal journey for that reason. The Pope did a couple of things. So he met with survivors of sexual abuse, and that was a closed-door meeting, so there were no journalists there. We don't know exactly what was said, but there were some interviews afterwards with some of the survivors who said that he really listened to them and they felt moved by that. And he also visited some universities. So Belgium is home to two famous Catholic universities. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. One is, I think, Leuven, and one is Louvain. And one is Dutch-speaking or Flemish-speaking, the other one is French-speaking. And they're two very historic, very prestigious Catholic universities, and the Pope visited both of them. There was, if I remember rightly, there was at Leuven, the Flemish Dutch-speaking one. He kind of had an exchange with the professors, and then what was interesting was afterwards when he came to Louvain, it was more a dialogue with the students. But on both kind of occasions, he was doing what we really came to expect from Pope Francis, which was this dialogue, kind of talking to people, even people who disagreed with him. I remember there was some when the students were talking to him, as well as they agreed with a lot of what he said, and then they were pointing out some points where they disagreed, and that was really typical of Pope Francis as well, this desire to talk to people, even people that didn't agree with him.
Absolutely.
And so it was kind of it was a classic Francis trip in that way.
I was speaking to the international director of the Jesuit refugee service just slightly after his death, and he said very much what you have been saying. He would sit down and enter into dialogue with the person he had before him, and it was never a problem to disagree or to listen to a differing perspective. In fact, he was interested in doing exactly that.
Yeah.
Certainly the fact of his meeting with Jesuits wherever he travelled in any of the journeys around the world became a particular hallmark, didn't it, of these trips, and I think a particularly important moment for the Jesuit community throughout the world. I'm wondering, Don, if you can tell us anything about the frequencies of popes belonging to particular orders as opposed to those who don't. I mean,
it's not terribly common. We remember it was almost a shock when Jorge Bergoglio was a Jesuit, right? It was kind of popularly thought that a Jesuit would never become pope, so that was very shocking. There have been several popes from religious orders. From the Franciscans and Dominicans, each have a handful of popes. None since the 18th century, late 18th century. There have been some monk popes, particularly during the period of the monastic revival in the 11th century. But by and large, they have been taken, a lot of them from the secular clergy. That's been mainly, and they've kind of gone back and forth between the diplomatic corps and between canon lawyers and theologians, and that's been pretty much the case. There hasn't been too much of while there is always, I would say, about 15% of representation in the College of Cardinals come from religious orders. They do not often get elected to the papacy. And I don't think it's any particular animus against. It maybe historically have been against Jesuits, but that's not. But I'm talking back from the very foundation of the order. But it's really something that the person has to fit the job too. And very often religious orders are focused on a ministry. They're focused on a particular specialty. And the pastor, the secular priest, the bishop has got to be all things to all people. And that often is better training for the kind of things you'll encounter in the papacy than other forms of religious living.
And I'm wondering, is that 15% roughly the same today with the cardinals who are gathered behind the walls of the
I'd
Sistine
have to look.
Chapel?
I could make a count, but I would suggest it's roughly 15 to 20%.
And so after the Pope died, I saw a couple of headlines saying something along the lines of Pope Francis never stopped being a Jesuit. And this idea that as you were saying there, that each of these orders has their own charism and they really mark the members of those orders. I don't know if you have any thoughts about the ways in which Pope Francis never stopped being a Jesuit, the ways in which his Jesuit formation really shaped him and became the Pope that we all knew.
I think the Jesuit formation creates such strong individuals. They are able to. Think of the great Jesuit missionaries that are able to operate. They're meant from the very foundation not to live in religious community, right? They're meant to be able to be sort of sole proprietors sometimes when they need to be. and so go off like Francis Xavier around the world by themselves, never see another Jesuit for years and years and years. And I think that kind of style, that kind of particularly the Jesuit emphasis on obedience and on sort of the voluntas of the superior was very much in evidence in ways that you might not see from a Dominican perspective as well. So I think that strongly individualistic way of doing things. I don't mean individualism in a bad sense. I mean a strong, well-formed person that is able to act and knows their mind and acts in that way. And Jesuit formation is really effective at creating that. And so I think we saw some of those aspects coming out in his papacy for sure.
Would you say also the question of discernment, which is a particular feature of the spiritual exercises of the Jesuit mindset in some ways, and of course the discernment process is perhaps at the basis of this synodality, the synods on synodality and so on that Pope Francis has begun and as we know has set in motion through to another synod in 2028. I think that would perhaps also be another feature of
I think
of
so.
the
That's
Jesuits.
exactly right.
Yeah.
I'd like to remember Pope Francis's last gift, which was a Pope-mobile that has been readapted, thank you, Philippa, into a health clinic for the people of Gaza. I think that is such a significant and powerful gesture, reminding the world of those most in need.
And it came, of course, following the phone calls that he traditionally made so regularly to the parish, the Holy Family Parish in Gaza, which I think you visited. I was able to do so when I went there
When you went.
to the Holy Land some years ago, and was able to go to Gaza with the previous parish priest, and you know how significant it is, how important it is in any situation of conflict like that to know that the world has not forgotten you, to know that people are praying for you, that people are praying for peace. And clearly those phone calls that Pope Francis insisted on making right up until
even
the previous weekend.
From the hospital, when he was in the hospital, when he could, he would call Padre Romanelli and just ask them what they'd had for dinner.
Smoke. We have smoke.
We do have smoke
we have
coming out of
smoke?
that chimney, but it's
And it is
definitely
black
black.
smoke.
Definitely black smoke.
Definitely black smoke. It's 21 hours. It's 9 o'clock in the evening here in Rome. And that is,
They took their time with
They
it.
took their time. They had a good think. They listened to a meditation by the papal preacher, which probably took time as well. Definitely black smoke there, I would say.
And I wonder what the reaction is in the square below, to the crowds who are seeing that and knowing that there has been no decision, no successful outcome on this occasion. And now we have a shot of the square. I can see some cell phones flashing away there, whether they'll be able to capture that black smoke billowing in the wind there out of the chimney and away across the rooftop of the Sistine Chapel and the rest of the Vatican museums. I'm not sure, but that's certainly black smoke.
I wonder if we have some sound from the square there. Do we have squares? No, we don't. They tell us we don't. But we can see. Here we are.
Well,
The noise
they've
of
made
the
sure
crowd.
of it at least. That's good. They've
wow.
got a good bit of it. Yes, a good crowd in the square.
And you can see, of course, those giant screens set up so that even if you can't actually see from where you're standing,
Which it looks difficult to see from
it
now.
does.
it does,
It
doesn't
does.
it? Yeah. And in fact, I remember that from past
And as you were
years.
saying, it's
At
dark.
nighttime, yes,
Yes.
it becomes difficult.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, that is again. I never fail to be moved by the sight of our most beautiful city, the Bernini Colonnade, St. Peter's illuminated, that night sky. It could have rained today, but it didn't, which was also
It
a
looks
blessing
like we
for
may
many.
have good weather for the rest of the week. So
There you are.
that's-
And you
that's
can
good.
see, if you're watching on the television screen, it is now completely dark in Rome. The lights are on. new illumination of the dome of St. Peter's. And the crowd, I think, is very relieved to see smoke, and very definite black smoke. I think there was no question from the very beginning.
But I want to say thanks to Joseph Tulloch for joining us there. He disappeared out of the studio.
Yes, and thanks again to Joseph for relaying his experiences. And thanks to our team in studio.
I can see people making their way
people
fairly
are moving
swiftly out of the square. Definitely past dinner time here in Rome. But
and I'll tell you, it's going to be tough to find a restaurant anywhere near St. Peter's this evening.
Yes.
But do keep following us here on Vatican Media, Vatican News.
We'll start tomorrow again at
We will
10:30.
start.
Is that right? Rome time?
You are a guest tomorrow morning
I think I
again,
am, yes.
and with Christopher Wells here in studio. So yes, 10:30 Rome time tomorrow morning for another marathon
And sure
commentary.
we'll have Devin as well tomorrow in the anchor spot.
Yes.
He joined us with some great contributions from the square. So thanks to Devin.
Yes,
and
thanks
especially to our guests, Philippa Hitchin and Don Prudlow, for providing so much information and insight and your memories and reflections from the various pontificates.
And being
Thank
so
you so
game
much.
for such a long and
marathon
live,
session.
wonderful. And thank you to Francesca Merlo for being our great producer. And I can see out there Kelsey Gassi, who is also working away behind the scenes, and Mario Scatton. Thank you, all of you. Chiudiamo. We can, they're signaling us from the...
we are, in fact, going to finish up our broadcast now with the main event has occurred, as it were. So again, thanks to all those who participated in the evenings. Thanks to especially to our head of the English section, Linda Bordoni, who has done so much hard work to make all of this possible.
And thank you, Christopher.
And as we do close up our broadcast, I would like to thank all of our broadcast partners as well, including EWTN TV, Catholic Faith Network in America, Shalom World Television Network USA, Atmadarshan TV, Catholic TV, Mata TV India, and UCTV, Uganda Catholic Television. Also our radio partners, Luminous Radio and Radio Katipunan in the Philippines. Thanks to all of you. Please join us again tomorrow. Laudetur Jesus Christus.